Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start today by asking you to do something, well, a little bit weird.
I'm intrigued.
I want you to visualize your wallet, or more likely these days, your banking app.
Right.
Just picture that little digital number on the screen, the one that tells you your net worth, or just how much you have left until payday.
That is definitely a number we all obsess over.
Exactly. And we look at that flow, right? Money coming in from a paycheck, money going out for rent, groceries, maybe a little set aside for a rainy day. And we tend to think of that flow as,
Just math.
yes, just math. It's neutral. It's like physics. It's just how the modern world works.
It is the water we swim in.
Mhm.
And usually fish don't really question the water.
They don't. But today, we're looking at a stack of documents that basically argues the water is actually, well, not just dirty, but maybe chemically wrong for the organism.
That's a great way to put it.
We are looking at a set of sources that analyze specific Quranic economic verses, specifically from Surah al-Baqarah, verses 271 to 280. But before you tune out thinking this is just a theology lecture, I really need you to hit pause on that assumption.
Right, because it's so easy to just categorize this as religious text.
Mhm.
But the analysis we have here in these sources, it's functioning much more like an autopsy of the modern economy.
That is exactly the vibe I got reading through this. We are not looking at a sermon today. We are looking at this radical economic critique. It's a full breakdown of labor, dignity, and the literal anatomy of poverty.
And anatomy really is the right word here. The sources we're diving into today, they include these incredibly detailed etymological dictionaries breaking down Arabic roots and these really dense theoretical frameworks.
Comparing what they call divine growth versus capitalist accumulation.
Exactly. And they aren't just giving moral commands, they are describing a biological system. They're arguing that money, labor, and society, they function like a living organism.
And if you mess with the biology of an organism, it creates antibodies, or it gets necrosis.
Precisely. And the central thesis here is jarring. It argues that what we call financial growth.
Like interest, returns on capital, money making money.
Right, all of that. It argues that this is actually a form of disease. It suggests that our charts going up and to the right might actually be tracking the growth of a tumor, not the healthy body.
That is a heavy opener. So just to set the ground rules for you, the listener, before we really jump in, we have this stack of sources. We've got linguistic breakdowns, the exegesis of the verses, essays on the philosophy of labor. And our mission today is just to unpack the internal logic of these texts.
Right, we are strictly impartial reporters today. We are exploring the how and the why of this specific economic worldview.
We want to understand the mechanics of the argument they're making.
Exactly. Whether you agree with the theology or the politics or not, the economic mechanism they describe is just fascinatingly complex. And we are not taking sides, just laying out what the text says.
Perfect. So let's jump in. I think the first major concept we need to really grapple with is this boundary line. The text draws this hard, undeniable line in the sand between two concepts, bay and riba.
This is the absolute foundation of the whole framework. Bays essentially translates to trade or commerce. And riba is usually translated as usury or interest. Now, in a modern MBA program, or honestly just in our daily lives, we tend to blur those lines entirely. We think of finance as just another industry, right?
Sure, you can sell widgets or you can sell loans. Both are just valid ways to make a profit in our system.
Exactly. Money is treated as a product. You buy it, you sell it, you rent it out.
Right. But the source material is arguing that these two things, trade and interest, they are not just different, they are opposites, like matter and antimatter.
And reading through the linguistic breakdown of the text, the difference doesn't actually seem to be about profit margins at all. It all comes down to one really specific ingredient. Yes, human labor. This is the crucial distinction. The texts define bay, which is legitimate trade, as a compound. The formula is capital plus human exertion.
Let's ground that with an example so I can wrap my head around it. Say I'm a baker. I buy flour, which is my capital.
Right.
And then I wake up at 4 in the morning. I knead the dough. I manage the hot oven. I deal with the customers. That is my exertion. And then I sell the bread for a profit. The text says that profit is valid because, well, why exactly?
Because it is direct compensation for that exertion. You added value to the world through human agency. You took a risk.
The flour could have burned in the oven.
Exactly. Or the customers might not have shown up that day. You were an active participant in the physical transformation of the materials. You sweat for it.
I get that. Now let's compare that to riba.
The sources define riba, or interest, as earning excess purely from the capital itself. You strip away the labor entirely. You strip away the risk, and you are just left with making money.
The sources use a phrase that really stuck out to me here, and I think it's just a great image. They call it the sleeping partner.
Oh, yes. It's a very vivid image in the text.
It's this idea of an investor who provides the funds, but then just goes to sleep.
Right.
They contribute absolutely no labor, no management, no effort. They just wait. And the argument the text is making is, if you strip the labor away and profit only from time passing and the money itself, you have crossed a boundary into the forbidden.
It connects right back to the fundamental theory of value that's presented here. The text argues that compensation must be solely the result of human labor and effort.
But let's play devil's advocate for a second, because I know there are listeners thinking about this right now. And the text actually anticipates this, right?
It does.
There's a section where the critics in the text say, wait a minute, trade is exactly like interest. You put money in, you get more money out. What is the real difference? Time is money. If I let you use my money for a year, I am losing the opportunity to use it myself.
The opportunity cost.
Why shouldn't I be compensated for that inconvenience?
That is the classic modern rebuttal. Trade is like usury. And the source material basically slams the door on that comparison with what we can call the zero argument.
Break down the zero argument for us, because I feel like this is where the actual physics of their economic model comes in.
It's a really interesting thought experiment found in the texts. So imagine you have a stack of silver coins, or a stack of $100 bills in our context.
I'm picturing it.
You put them in a room, you lock the door, and you leave them there for 10 years.
All right.
When you come back and unlock the door, how many coins do you have?
Exactly the same amount. Unless mice ate the bills, or inflation ate the purchasing power, but the physical amount is identical.
Exactly. Do they breed? Do they have babies while you were gone?
No.
Does the stack get taller on its own?
No, it's inert matter. It's just sitting there.
Precisely. The text argues that money implies a value of zero regarding growth on its own. It is completely sterile. It cannot breed. It absolutely requires the human touch.
Labor, trade, risk, actual movement.
Yes, all of that to generate any real value.
So the argument is, if I lend you those inert coins, and I demand that you give me back more than I gave you, simply because time has passed.
You are charging for something that doesn't exist.
Right. I'm charging you for the growth of the money, but the money didn't grow. You grew it.
That's the key. You are appropriating the fruit of someone else's labor simply because you held the capital. The source actually calls this an unjustified excess.
Because you're acting as a partner in the profit, but a stranger to the work.
Exactly. You are taxing the other person's effort because you hold the keys to the vault.
It really frames it as a parasitic relationship rather than a symbiotic one.
That goes back to the biological framing we talked about. In legitimate trade, we are partners. We sink or swim together. In an interest-based loan, the lender is immune.
Right. If my business fails, I still owe you the money plus the interest. You have totally severed your fate from mine.
Now, here is where it gets really interesting, and I think this is what trips up a modern listener. We usually think of usury as predatory lending.
Like a loan shark breaking kneecaps.
Yeah.
Or a payday lender charging 400% interest to a poor person who just needs to fix their car to get to work.
Right. Low-hanging fruit, morally speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone hates a loan shark.
But the source material makes a really specific, almost counterintuitive point about commercial interests.
Yes, it does.
This is the scenario where I lend $1 million to a wealthy businessman. He is going to use my $1 million to build a factory, and he's going to make $10 million. Why shouldn't I get a cut of that? It's a commercial loan. No one is starving here. Everyone is wearing a suit.
This is a critical nuance in the text, because many people argue, sure, don't exploit the poor, but commercial lending between wealthy parties is totally different. Right. The text refutes this justification entirely. It says the issue isn't just about the poverty of the borrower. It's about the nature of the transaction itself.
Because the lender is still acting as a sleeping partner.
Exactly. Even if the borrower makes a massive profit, the lender exerted no effort. The text argues that if you want a share of the profit, you must share in the risk in the enterprise.
Which would be equity, or a true partnership.
Right. But if you demand a fixed return, regardless of the outcome, simply for renting out your money, you are violating that core principle that labor is the only legitimate justification for profit.
So it's not just a moral stance about being nice to poor people. It's a structural, mathematical stance about how value is actually created in a society. It's saying you cannot sever the link between reward and work.
And this leads us directly into what the text describes as the macroeconomic paradox.
Because you might look at this and ask, so what? If I make money from interest, I have more money. My bank account grows. That looks like growth to me.
Right. It feels like growth. It looks like a hill getting bigger. You log into your 401k, the chart goes up, you feel richer.
But the sources introduce this fascinating paradox here. They argue that while riba, or interest, looks like a mathematical increase, doubles and redoubles on paper.
In reality, it depletes the national wealth.
Let's unpack this. Because how can more money equal less prosperity? On the surface, that sounds like bad math.
It is bad math if you only look at the individual bank account, but it's perfect biology if you look at the entire society. The text argues that interest systems create a class of people who literally stop working because their money works for them.
The rentier class.
Yes. They exit the arena of production entirely. They stop building, they stop farming, they stop creating anything new, they just manage their returns. And simultaneously, the system burdens the actual working class with servicing that debt.
So the people who are actually building the houses and baking the bread are losing a significant chunk of their labor just to pay the sleeping partners?
Exactly. The source argues that as the habit of labor is lost across the society, as the easy money of interest becomes the ultimate goal for everyone, the nation's practical faculties become paralyzed.
Practical faculties. That's a really great phrase from the text. It's like the actual muscle of the nation starts to atrophy.
That's exactly it. If you can make more money by lending it out than by building a factory or farming a field, eventually no one builds or farms. The entire economy becomes financialized.
Just a bubble.
It creates a delusion that you can generate immense wealth without facing the possibility of loss or actual sweat.
And there's a specific word the expert linguistic breakdown highlights here, an Arabic term used to describe this specific societal state. Etheme.
Oh, this is one of the most powerful linguistic insights in the entire stack of sources.
Let's get into this.
So in standard religious contexts, a theme is often translated simply as sinful. The user of interest is a sinner, which, if you aren't religious, you might just shrug that off.
Right, you just think, oh, I'm a sinner, but I'm a rich sinner, so I'll live with it.
But the etymology, the deep root origin of the word, is much more descriptive. It refers to a very specific physical phenomenon.
What is the root?
It refers to a camel. Specifically, a camel that is so fatigued, so deeply exhausted, that it slows down and lags behind the rest of the herd. It physically cannot keep up.
Wow, that's a vivid image.
It really is. The text uses this word, a theme, to describe a society that is consumed by interest. It's not just calling it bad or naughty, it is calling it an exhausted camel.
So the argument is that an economy run on interest isn't a high-speed Ferrari, despite what all those Wall Street movies tell us.
Right.
It's actually a dying animal that can't keep up with the rest of the world.
Because it has paralyzed its practical faculties.
Mm-hmm.
The labor force is completely exhausted from constantly servicing debt, and the capital class is exhausted from a lack of physical exertion. The whole organism just becomes sluggish.
That flips the script completely. We usually think of financial hubs, places like New York, London, Hong Kong, as the most energetic places on Earth.
High energy, speed.
High-frequency trading, caffeine, endless hustle. But this text is looking at that exact same picture and saying, look closer. Is that real energy, or is it just the fever of accumulation?
And that leads perfectly to the visual the text provides next. It contrasts the swelling of interest with the growth of charity. Interest is described like a hill or a bubble. It looks really big from the outside, but it's empty or unstable inside.
And
true growth, the text argues, comes strictly from circulation, grounded reality.
This brings us to the psychology of it all. Because if interest creates this exhausted society, why are we so universally addicted to it? What is driving that deep need to accumulate more and more?
The sources dive really deep into the psychology of what they call takathur, which is the obsession with accumulation. And they use an image that is honestly terrifying, the snake bite. The text says the greed for accumulation is exactly like the thirst caused by a specific type of snake venom.
Walk me through the symptoms of this metaphorical bite.
The victim feels an absolute unquenchable thirst, so they drink water. But the venom blocks the body's ability to actually process the hydration. So the more water they drink, the more they physically need to drink. The thirst actually increases with every single sip.
Until they burst.
Until they literally die of thirst while drowning in water.
That is such a visceral metaphor for greed. It implies that the concept of enough is biologically impossible for someone trapped in this mindset.
It implies a mindset of absolute, unending scarcity. Even if you have $1 billion in the bank, if you are bitten by this mindset. You feel poor. You constantly feel like you're running out.
You look at your massive pile of gold and you are just terrified it will evaporate.
Exactly.
And what do you do when you are in that state of fear, when you fear running out?
You hide it. You hoard it.
Exactly. And the text introduces this concept of hidden wealth. It links this hoarding behavior to the term kafar. Now, usually kafar is translated as infidel or non-believer. There's a lot of heavy religious baggage there.
Very heavy. But if you strip it back to the absolute root, meaning in the etymology dictionary, kafar comes from the root to cover or to hide. It was originally an agricultural term used to describe farmers burying seeds deep in the soil.
So in this specific economic context we're discussing, the kafar is the one who covers their wealth.
Yes, they are the hider. They hide it away in vaults or offshore accounts. They intentionally take it out of circulation because they are so deeply afraid of the future.
So an interest-based mindset naturally leads to a narrow-minded society where everyone is just terrified of poverty, so they hide their resources. The money physically stops moving through the community.
The blood clots.
And that is death for the organism.
Precisely.
So what is the cure? If the disease is this blockage, this hoarding, this endless snakebite thirst, what is the medicine the text prescribes?
The text calls the antidote infaq, which basically translates to spending or expenditure. But it's not just going to the mall and buying things. It's the intentional circulation of surplus wealth back into the community.
And this is a really huge, but in the text, it puts a massive condition on this spending. It can't just be philanthropy where you get a giant bronze plaque with your name on it.
No, absolutely not. This is where the internal transformation comes in. The source says, this circulation must be completely free of two specific things, jaza and shukura.
Define those for us because they seem really strict.
Jaza is compensation, meaning expecting a financial return. That's the obvious one. No interest, no monetary favors.
Right.
But shukura means gratitude or thanks.
Well, hold on, let me get this straight. So say I give you money to help you start a business or feed your family. Obviously, I shouldn't charge you interest. That's jaza. But you're saying I can't even expect a simple thank you.
That is the extremely high bar the text sets. It calls this an internal transformation of the heart. If you give money expecting praise or expecting the recipient to look at you with deference or expecting a nice tax write-off, you haven't actually circulated the wealth in a pure way. You've just bought power.
You've bought social status.
Exactly. You have engaged in a transaction. I give you money, you give me your dignity. And the text says, no, you must give purely. You are simply a vessel moving resources from a place where they were stuck to a place where they are urgently needed.
That is incredibly difficult. It removes the ego entirely from the economic equation. It basically asks you to be invisible.
It does, but the guarantee, and the text explicitly calls it a guarantee, is that wealth circulated this way absolutely returns to the giver.
Just not necessarily in cash.
Right. It returns in the creation of a stable, healthy environment.
It's kind of like the rising tide lifts all boats argument, but with this really deep spiritual engine driving it.
Think about it practically for a second. If your neighbors aren't starving, local crime goes down. If your community is healthy, your business has reliable customers. If you eliminate the desperate need for survival crime, you don't need to build a literal fortress to protect your house. You save money on security. You live in a world with significantly less friction.
So the actual return on investment is a society completely free from fear.
Precisely.
Now, talking about neighbors and those in need, this leads us to one of the most surprising parts of this whole deep dive for me. And that is the text's definition of the poor.
Yes, the fuqara.
Usually when we think of the needy, we have a very specific stereotype in our heads. The beggar on the street corner, the squeaky wheel, the person holding the cardboard sign at the intersection asking for help.
And the sources completely flip that image on its head. They argue that those people, while they absolutely might need help, are not the true fuqara described in this specific economic mandate.
So who are the fuqara?
The text defines them with a very specific, poignant phrase. Those who are
besieged, like a city under medieval attack.
Yes, or paralyzed by circumstances. The exact Arabic phrase is zarbun filaris, which means they are literally unable to move freely in the land to seek a livelihood. They are trapped.
And the metaphor the text uses here is just beautiful, the unbloomed sapling.
It's a crucial distinction to understand. Think of a full-grown tree. It has really deep roots. It can easily find its own water deep underground. That represents a wealthy or self-sufficient person.
Right.
Now think of a young sapling. It has the exact same biological potential to be a massive tree. The biology is all there. But right now, its roots are incredibly shallow. It cannot reach the water table yet. If you don't water it, it dies. But if you do water it, it eventually strikes deep roots and becomes completely self-sufficient.
So the faker is not a dead stick. They are a potential tree that is just currently stuck in a dry patch.
Exactly. Aid, in this specific context, is not a handout designed just to keep a beggar alive for one more day. It is a strategic investment in a sapling so it can strike its own roots. The text calls it providing an external trench of water temporarily.
But here's the kicker, and this is where it gets really challenging. How do you find these saplings? Because the text says they don't actually ask for water.
This brings us to the profound concept of
Tafuf.
It translates roughly to dignified restraint or intense self-control. The defining characteristic of the true fuqara is that they absolutely refuse to display their poverty to the world. They refuse to beg. The text uses the word ilhaf, which means persistent begging, and says they simply do not do this.
So they are struggling, they are besieged, they might literally not know where next week's rent or groceries are coming from, but they're wearing clean clothes, they are smiling, they're keeping it together in public.
Because they value their inherent dignity far more than they value your money. And the consequence of this, which the text notes very clearly, is that the unobservants assume they are wealthy because of their restraint.
That is heartbreaking and profound. You look at them and think, oh, they're fine, they have a smartphone, they look decent, they smiled at me today, but internally they are completely drowning.
And this creates a massive structural challenge for the giver. Because in a modern capitalist charity model, the squeaky wheel always gets the grease. You help the person screaming the loudest on the street. You wait for people to actively apply for aid and fill out the forms.
That you literally have to perform your poverty to get any help.
But the Quranic model described here says, ignore the noise. Look for
The silent language of the face. That was a phrase in the source notes that really struck me.
Yes. The sources state that these specific individuals can only be identified by observant, perceptive individuals. You have to train yourself to read the subtle signs. The involuntary twitch of distress when a bill comes, the flight trace of hunger that they desperately try to hide, the fact that they wear the exact same coat every single day in winter.
It totally shifts the burden of responsibility. Usually our society says, well, if you need help, just ask. But this text says, if you have means, it is your active job to notice.
It demands a highly connected, intimate society. You cannot just write a check to some faceless mega organization and consider your duty done. You have to look your brother in the eye and actually read his face. It requires absolute proximity.
That connects right back to the biology analogy from the beginning. In a human body, the blood doesn't wait for the toe to file a request for oxygen.
Right.
It just flows there naturally because the entire system is intrinsically connected.
Precisely. If the toe has to actively beg for blood, the system is already critically failing.
Wow. This brings us to the final section of our dive today, which is the severity of this whole mandate. Because we've talked a lot about biology and psychology and saplings, which all sounds very holistic, but the text frames the failure to do this as a literal war.
It does. And this is where the language in the sources gets incredibly intense. The text references a formal declaration of war from God and the messenger against those who persist in interest-based systems.
A declaration of war, that is not a slap on the wrist.
No, it's not. And the textual analysis points out that in the entire text, this is the only sin that carries such a heavy militant penalty. Not theft, not even murder.
Why is interest the ultimate red line that triggers a state of war?
Because, as we discussed with the macroeconomic paradox, it fundamentally destroys the social fabric. It turns the entire society into an exhausted camel. It creates this permanent predator-prey relationship between the lender and the borrower. The text argues that you simply cannot have a functioning community if one half is actively eating the other half.
So the war mandate is actually a response to the destruction of the community. It's a massive intervention to stop the organism from cannibalizing itself.
Exactly. It operates as a systemic defense mechanism.
And what does the peace treaty look like then? If you want to stop the war and heal the organism, how do you handle debt? The source outlines a very specific progression for this.
It's a three-step protocol for dealing with the debtor. Step one is simply justice. If they can pay the debt, they pay it. But with zero interest. Principal only. You get back exactly what you gave, nothing more.
Fair enough. Contracts matter.
Step two. If they're in genuine difficulty, the term is usra, you grant them a delay, a nazira. You patiently wait until times are easy for them. You don't add late fees. You don't compound the debt. You essentially freeze time.
You give the sapling the time it needs to find the water.
Yes. And then step three. This is the highest level. The text calls it the believer's standard. If the debtor really cannot pay without being totally destroyed, you write it off entirely. You convert the debt into charity.
There is an anecdote in the source material about this exact thing. It contrasts the creditor who just laughs and forgives the debt versus the one who obsessively calculates and compounds every penny.
Yes, it contrasts the good loan, the Qard Hassan, where the creditor views the loan as a spiritual and social investment, versus the standard commercial loan. The text argues that the interest piles up not just as numbers on a ledger, but as fire or a spiritual burden, whereas the forgiveness piles up as immense social stability and spiritual return.
And that brings us to the ultimate, so why does any of this actually matter in the real world? The sources explicitly state the final goal of this entire economic system, and it is not to have the highest GDP in the world.
No, not at all. The ultimate metric of success here is the complete absence of two specific emotional states. Khawf and huzn.
Fear and greed.
Specifically, khawf is the fear of the future. It's that gnawing anxiety about survival. Will I be okay next month? Will I lose my home if I get sick?
And huzn.
Huzn is deep grief over the past. Regret, loss, the sorrow of being ruined.
Just imagine a society where the entire economic framework is designed specifically to eliminate human anxiety.
The text envisions a socio-economic order where the circulation of wealth is so fluid and the observation of the needy is so acute that absolutely no individual is left in anxiety about their basic survival.
It explicitly contrasts this peace with the fear of war, right?
It says, essentially, you have a choice. You can have the invisible war of an interest-based system where everyone is fighting each other for scraps, hiding their wealth, and terrified of poverty. Or you can have the peace of a circulation-based system where the community acts as an unbreakable safety net.
It really is a choice between the law of the jungle and the law of the garden.
That is a perfect way to summarize it.
So let's recap the main pillars we've uncovered today in this architecture of dignity.
Pillar 1. Labor is the absolute boundary. You cannot divorce profit from human effort. Money cannot breed money. Only people can generate true value.
Pillar 2. Circulation is health. Hoarding is illness. The exhausted camel is exactly what happens when the wealth stops moving through the veins of the society.
And Pillar 3. Dignity is the key to aid. The truly needy don't beg. It is our active job to be observant, to find those hidden saplings, and to water them without ever expecting a thank you.
It's a massive, heavy lift. It requires a completely different way of seeing the world and our neighbors, but it is just endlessly fascinating to think about.
It truly challenges the very foundation of modern global finance.
Here is the final thought I want to leave you with today, and it builds on something the expert mentioned earlier. The text suggests that national wealth isn't actually what we have sitting in the bank. It is the collective energy and muscle of a working population. So, if our modern system, with all its trillions of dollars in derivatives and compounding interest and passive income, is actually slowly eroding the human will to work, if it's creating a massive class of people who are just endlessly servicing debt or waiting for returns,
then we really have to ask the uncomfortable question.
Are modern, supposedly wealthy nations actually just exhausted camels in disguise? Are we slowly lagging behind the herd, weighed down by the very illusion we call growth?
It is a profound question worth asking yourself.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It has been an absolute mind-bender to go through these sources.
Always a pleasure to unpack this with you.
Keep your eyes open out there. Take the time to actually read the faces around you, and we will catch you on the next one.